On June 12, 1942, the 343rd Infantry Division, having made a 350-kilometre march for a week, joined the 21st Army, which was engaged in defensive battles in the Volchan direction. The regiment took the defence on the line de Czarnoye-Maximovka. Here we had our first meeting with the troops of the 6th German Army of Paulus. On June 30th, its strike group went on the offensive from the area of Volchansk to Ostrogozhsk, broke through the defence of the 21st and 28th Armies, and for 2 days of fighting, by the end of June 2nd, having advanced 80 kilometres, came to the area of Stary Oskol and Volokonovka. Part of the compounds of our 21st Army, including the 343rd Rifle Division, was surrounded. We, of course, did not know then the general picture of events at the front of the 21st Army, and, to be honest, we did not know anything about other regiments of our division. Communication with the division headquarters stopped after we received the order to withdraw from the previous positions. A day later, the regiment found itself near the village of Zelebok. I remember it well, covered with gardens and surrounded by beams. We came here in the evening, took the defence. On the left, on the crest of one of the gullies, the 1st Battalion of Nikolai Abukov, and on the right, across the ravine from us, the 2nd and 3rd Battalions. Behind our positions was a large wheat field. The night passed more or less quietly, except for the gunfire somewhere not far from the village, and at dawn it was discovered that German tank and motorized units bypassed us from all sides and cut us off from other regiments. We learned about this from the divorcees sent by Lieutenant Colonel Kilchevsky to the neighbours on the right and blind. Everywhere they ran into Hitlerites. I saw how 6 enemy tanks went into the attack on us. At the NP, together with me and Commissar of the regiment Ibragimov, was at that time Junior Lieutenant Popov, a very young guy who had recently arrived in the regiment to the post of Nakhim. Run to Kostin, I ordered him, let him pull up his guns and put them on direct aiming. Popov saluted and flew out of the trench, and in a few minutes Kostin's battery had already opened fire. Artillerymen hit 4 armoured cars, the other 2 withdrew. But by evening Hitlerites again went on the attack, and we had to retreat. We found ourselves among yellowing wheat. In it we took shelter from the targeted rifle and machine gun fire. I don't know why, but the enemy stopped the attacks, and we got some respite. I say some because the fascist tanks were beating on the field, and the shells were tearing out whole bundles of wheat stalks from the roots. At that moment we decided to go for a breakthrough. I went with one of the groups, and, when Hitlerites appeared ahead, I shouted hurrah and rushed forward, firing my automatic rifle. The soldiers picked up my call and rushed after me. The fascists did not expect, apparently, such a pressure from the surrounded and defeated. According to their concept, the enemy, and dodging the hand-to-hand combat, fell back, firing on the move. Of course, we did not do without losses. Less than half of the personnel remained in the regiment when we left the encirclement. On July 4th, the remnants of the units crossed the Dol and joined their division in the area of Luzov. Since other units had lost a lot of personnel and equipment in the offensive and defensive battles, the division needed additional manpower, weapons and ammunition. We almost completely lost the service of artillery armament of the regiment. Only Senior Gunnery Foreman M.I. Klayev, who arrived in the regiment when it was formed in August 1941, and Gunnery Foreman S.I. Strepkov, a former mechanic of one of the aircraft factories in Voronezh, came out of the encirclement. On July 6th to 7th, in the area of Butalinovka, more than 400 men were transferred to our regiment, the remnants of the 1052nd Rifle Regiment of the 301st Division, which had suffered heavy losses. Fortunately for us, in this regiment survived almost entirely artillery service. It joined our regiment headed by the head of the artillery workshop, military technician NMM Kodenko. Together with him came Senior Artmaster G.D. Gorval, Radio Master A.R. M. Zizukovich, Senior Weapons Master P. M. Kravtsov, Senior Chemical Master N.S. Makarov, and other specialists. Having been replenished with men and weapons, our regiment, as well as the whole division, was ordered to forcefully march almost 300-kilometre route through Vorobievka, Alexievskaya, Mikhailovskaya, and redeploy to the town of Frolov. Here we were additionally staffed with men, weapons and ammunition. The number of the regiment was brought to 60 to 70% of the staff. And in 3 or 4 days the division was ordered to move 50 to 60 kilometers in the southwestern direction from Frolov to the area of Kletskaya on the Don, and took up the defense at the line Kozinsky, Vyezdinovsky, Malo-Melovskaya. After the retreat of our troops from near Kharkov, from Donbass and the abandonment of Rostov-on-Don on the southern wing of the Soviet-German front, was a very difficult situation. On July 28, 1942, the order of the People's Commissar of Defense of the USSR No. 227 was issued. I remember when we received it at the regimental headquarters and read it, we all got goosebumps. Perhaps for the first time during the whole war the situation at the front was so frankly assessed. The main slogan of the order, "Not a step back," was clear to everyone. There was nowhere further to retreat. Stalingrad and the Volga were behind us. The enemy is in the North Caucasus. Order No. 227 was communicated to every soldier. All commanders and political workers took part in explaining it to the personnel. And it, of course, played its mobilizing role. People somehow tightened up, became stricter to themselves. At this time, parts of the division conducted enhanced reconnaissance on the right bank of the Don. It turned out that the enemy in our strip left only a small force for the defense of individual points, and the main corps of the 6th Army was concentrated in the area of Kalak, in readiness for the attack on Stalingrad from the west. This was used by the command of the 21st Army and gave our division the task to force the Don, occupy a bridgehead on its right bank near Kremenskaya, and reach the upper spurs of the Sukhoi Log Gully. Such an order was received on August 1st, and on the night of August 2nd began forcing the river. The first to cross was the 1153rd Rifle Regiment, capturing the height of 174.1 by the end of the day and ensuring the crossing of the main forces of the division. Together with it, the 1155th Rifle Regiment crossed the Don near Malo-Melovskaya and captured the height of 184.1. Our regiment crossed the river on the night of August 3rd and entered the battle for the capture of Malo-Kletskaya. Capture of the bridgehead by our units obviously alarmed Hitlerites, and they already in the morning of August 3rd made an attempt to throw us back behind the Don. The attack of infantry and tanks was supported by massive airstrikes. On this day we were subjected to another attack. German planes dropped thousands of leaflets on the bridgehead. It was windless, almost a complete calm, as sailors say, and white sheets of paper circled in the air for a long time before falling to the ground. A few leaflets were lying near the regimental headquarters. I picked one up. On one side of the leaflet was printed an appeal to the soldiers of the 343rd Rifle Division to surrender as prisoners, because resistance, they said, was useless. Soviet Russia was about to kneel down and ask for mercy from Germany. And on the other side was placed a portrait of Stalin's son Yakov Dzhugashvili, who, as the authors of the text assured, was already in German captivity and had gone into the service of the Führer. This product of Hitler's special services was also a pass for surrendering into captivity, guaranteeing the life of the person who presented it. I brought the leaflet to the headquarters dugout, gave it to the regiment Commissar Ibragimov. Here, admire, Sabir Karlovich, what the Krauts have invented. He read the text, looked at the portrait and said to me, "Primitive propaganda, Yura. A Soviet fighter will never fall for it. And the portrait of Stalin's son is a clear provocation. Even if he was taken prisoner, which I don't believe, he would never serve the fascists." Many years after the war, I learned that Senior Lieutenant Yakov Dzhugashvili was indeed taken prisoner by the Germans and died there, and that Stalin rejected the offer of Hitler's command to exchange him for a captured German general. The whole day there was a battle, but all enemy attacks were repulsed. The division held the bridgehead. The soldiers fought fiercely. The 1st Battalion, which was defending a height near Malo-Kletskaya, had a particularly hard time. The enemy poured hurricane artillery fire on the positions of the unit. A little later came bombers, and finally came the tanks. Infantry rushed after them. Abukovsy did not falter. They cut off the machine gunners from the tanks, held on the heights. In one day the battalion fought off 3 attacks of enemy tanks, supported by artillery and aviation. In subsequent battles, this bridgehead was expanded by other formations of the 21st Army and was held until the Soviet troops went on the counter-offensive, until November 19, 1942. And our division was ordered on the night of August 13th to surrender its defensive line to the 321st Infantry Division. By the end of August 14th, we reached the line Novo-Grigorievskaya, Farm Yablonsky, and took up the defense. Here too we had to fight bloody battles. Mass heroism in the battle on the Volga expanses became the norm of behavior of Soviet soldiers. It is in this connection that I remember Junior Lieutenant G. Gordienko. His platoon was defending an important height. Up to 10 enemy tanks and up to 2 companies of infantry rushed to the position of the unit. The fight went about 2 hours. Hitlerites, having left 4 burnt tanks and up to 100 corpses on the height, turned back. The company commander sent his orderly to see the brave men. When the soldier came back, he could not speak a word. None of the platoon was alive. All 33 heroes died, but did not surrender the height to the enemy. Komsomol Sergeant Vlasov made an immortal feat. His department repelled another attack of the Germans. He was the only survivor. The fascists surrounded his trench. As long as there was ammunition, Vlasov shot cold-bloodedly and accurately. Then he fought back with grenades. And when there was 1 anti-tank grenade left, he clutched the handle and climbed out of the trench. 6 fascists rushed to our warrior to take him prisoner. But it was not so. Komsomolets Vlasov threw a grenade under his feet. I will not bore the reader with the description of battles, which the regiment fought in September and October 1942 northwest of Stalingrad. We repelled fierce enemy attacks and counterattacked ourselves, trying to improve our positions. We already knew that on September 12th the Nazis came close to the city, coming out on one of the sites directly to the Volga. We also knew about the heroic fighting in Stalingrad by the soldiers and commanders of the 62nd and 64th Armies. Almost every report of Sovinform Bureau began then with the battles in this stronghold on the Volga. And of course everyone well understood that by pulling back some of the enemy troops, we alleviate the difficult situation of our troops in Stalingrad. The city, hidden from the positions of our regiment by the heights, was burning. Black clouds of smoke hung over it, and those who had been near the Volga River told us that oil was burning on the river, spilling out of broken barges and storages. From September 28th to October 16th, the 343rd Infantry Division fought as part of the 24th Army, and then moved into the command of the commander of the 66th Army. On September 29th, the enemy made 4 infantry attacks supported by tanks on the positions of the 1151st Infantry Regiment near Kotlubani. The main blow Hitlerites struck the 2nd Battalion, which was commanded by Lieutenant Nestorenko. The soldiers of the battalion, supported by the regimental battery of Senior Lieutenant Kostin, repulsed all attacks and destroyed 4 tanks. That day, Lieutenant Nestorenko died. He was not yet 20 years old. He had recently arrived in the regiment, fought bravely and skillfully, passing for some 2 months from platoon to battalion commander. True, I must note that in the fall battles near Stalingrad we lost many commanders, and such a rapid promotion was also explained by this sad circumstance. In early October, for several days in succession, the regiments of the division tried to improve their positions. Here together with us fought the 241st and 114th Rifle Brigades. But our units had no success. We failed to break the strong resistance of the enemy. About the fierceness of those battles speak such facts. On October 7th, our regiment advanced for several hours only 300 meters, and this is after a solid artillery preparation and 3 raids of our attack aircraft on enemy positions. On this day, the commander of the 7th Rifle Company, Lieutenant Lesovoy, distinguished himself. He several times raised soldiers in the attack, was wounded, but did not leave the battlefield. In the division headquarters was reported, and the feat of machine gunner Red Army soldier Shenov. From his hand-held machine gun, he meticulously smashed the enemies until his weapon was out of order. Then the fighter stealthily crawled up to the German machine gunner, overcame him in single combat, took possession of his weapon and continued to fire. At this time I was acting as regimental commander, because Lieutenant Colonel Kilchevsky was transferred to another position in the summer, and a new regimental commander had not yet been appointed. A little later than Kilchevsky, our permanent Commissar Sabir Khalilovich Ibragimov was transferred to the political department of the army. It was especially difficult for me to part with him, because for more than a year, since the birth of the 1151st Rifle Regiment, I worked with him, as they call it, hand in hand. A true communist, he taught me a lot of things, especially how to communicate with people, taught me, as well as other officers of the staff, lessons of party political work. Together with Sabir Khalilovich, we were in the font of the regiment's baptism of fire in the steppes between Taganrog and Rostov. In one boat crossed the Douai to the village of Nizhny Nilovskaya. Together froze in the snow near Kharkov and swallowed road dust in the hot summer when we retreated from the Seversky Donets to the Big Bend of the Don. Instead of Ibragimov, Battalion Commissar A, N. Shkurin was appointed Commissar of the regiment, but he procommissarst for not long. October 9th, 1942 was promulgated the decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR on the establishment of complete unity of command in the Army and Navy and the abolition of the institution of military commissars, and became an Shkurin Deputy Regimental Commander for Political Affairs. I exchanged opinions with him on the introduction of sole command, and we came to the idea that this measure is necessary and timely. It should be said that Alexei Nikolaevich, before coming to the post of Regiment Commander Lieutenant Colonel P.R. Pansky, never emphasized in relation to me his seniority in rank and age. He was an intelligent, very tactful, restrained political officer. And I was very sorry that I had to work with him only a few months. In January 1943, Alexei Nikolaevich did not become. But I will tell you about it later. Since I remembered about the two first commissars of the regiment, I will tell you that the party political work was carried out in the units continuously and purposefully. Every month the ranks of communists and Komsomol members were replenished, especially before serious battles. In October 1942, for example, 26 soldiers and commanders were accepted as candidates and members of the All-Union Communist Party. When conducting party political work took into account the fact that the personnel of the regiment was multinational, and quite a few Red Army soldiers, drafted from the Central Asian republics, had little knowledge of the Russian language. When communicating with them, indispensable assistant was the secretary of the Komsomol Bureau of the regiment, Senior Lieutenant Geliev, a Tatar by nationality. He knew Kazakh and Uzbek languages in addition to Russian and Tatar. I remember well how at regimental meetings before the battle the Komsomol leader spoke in 4 languages in a row. He had Komsomol members who had a good command of Georgian, Azerbaijani and Armenian languages, along with Russian. In political reports to the political department of the division, the names of Komsomol activists Arkamedov, Sambakov, Chalidsay, Petrosian were mentioned more than once in connection with educational work among soldiers of non-Russian nationality. As it was mentioned above, on October 16th, the 343rd Rifle Company was transferred to the 66th Army of the Don Front, and in this army it was registered until the end of the Great Patriotic War. The 66th had the task of active actions to restrain the enemy, not to give him the opportunity to move reinforcements to Stalingrad. To accomplish this task, Commander Azjadov ordered the commander of our division to prepare and conduct a number of private battles to strengthen their positions. In these battles, of course, took part in our regiment. Especially memorable for me as the regiment's commander was the battle on October 20th in the area of Kopnoy Gully and height 112.7. The weather that day was, to put it bluntly, lousy. The rain that had fallen during the night had broken up the ground, and in the morning wet snow fell. It was hard to advance in such conditions. We had a half-hour artillery preparation, which ended, as usual, with a salvo of Katyushas. After that, our Elias in groups of 5 to 6 airplanes stormed the enemy positions. It would seem that the success of the attack was assured, all the more that in the infantry fighting order were T-34 tanks. And again, as 2 weeks earlier, the regiments of the division could not advance more than 200-300 meters. Why? The enemy's fire points were suppressed only partially. 730 Shevers blew up on minefields. Hitlerites had time to mine again the passages made by our sappers. In short, the conclusion I drew for myself was unambiguous: the enemy's forces must be known thoroughly if you want to succeed in battle with little blood. I must say that in these fall months in our regiment, and not only in our regiment, There was a rather difficult situation with the supply of food to the soldiers and horses' forage. The roads were muddy. Cars were stuck in the mud, and only horse-drawn wagons could bring food. One of October days, a group of soldiers of the transport company, headed by political officer Dudnikov, was returning from the supply base to the regiment. They were carrying food and ammunition. The wheels of the wagons stuck in sticky mud, and the convoy moved forward with great difficulty. Both men and horses were tired immensely and could hardly keep on their feet. It was decided to harness the horses and let them rest. And then one of the soldiers noticed that the horses were scattered across the field, bending their heads and eating something. It turned out that not far from the country road there was a whole field of unharvested wheat, though the bread was fallen. Dudnikov examined this field and came to the conclusion that at the expense of grain and straw is quite possible to replenish the regiment's reserves of fodder. About this he reported to me when he brought the cart to the regiment. I consulted with the deputy commander, and we decided to create a special group for grain harvesting. The main core of it was the men of the transport company, so immediately I entrusted this not quite ordinary business to Petty Officer F. Matura, a hereditary grain grower. With several men he went to the nearest villages to get pitchforks, rakes, scythes, rolls for threshing. Matura was lucky he got 2 pitchforks, 3 rakes, a broken roller, several scythes, and most importantly 2 faulty haymowers. One of them was somehow assembled, and the work boiled over. Then the fighters cleared a site for the current and their threshed wheat. For several days people worked on this collective farm field and harvested about a dozen hectares. Grain and straw delivered to the regiment became a great help for feeding horses. We met the 25th anniversary of the Great October Revolution in the trenches. True, representatives from all units were gathered for a short rally at which the festive order of People's Commissar of Defence I. Stalin was read. Speaking at the rally, party leader Captain Borozhenets, Assistant Chief of Staff Captain Belousov, the commander of the squad Sergeant Ipatov swore to do everything possible to prevent the capture of Stalingrad, Hitlerites. We of course did not know then that, by that time, the Supreme Command headquarters had already developed a detailed plan of our counter-offensive at Stalingrad, as well as did not know that the representatives of the headquarters, Army Gen. K. Zhukov, Chief Marshal of Artillery N.N. Voronov, had already worked for days in the troops of the Don, Stalingrad and southwestern fronts, preparing this counter-offensive. And on November 19th, the regiment received an appeal from the Military Council of the Don Front. Now, said in this appeal, on Pashushare fell the honour to develop a powerful offensive against the enemy. During the war you and I have hardened ourselves in the struggle, gained great military experience. New units have arrived to reinforce the front. We have all the conditions to defeat the enemy head-on, and we will do it for sure. A great honour fell to us today to go into a crushing battle against the damned enemy. How joyful for our people will be the news of our offensive, of our great advance, of the liberation of our native land. We will be able to crush the enemy hordes. Forward to the enemy. The appeal of the Military Council of the Front was communicated to all soldiers and commanders at the meetings held in the units. Speaking at them, soldiers gave their word that they would not spare blood and life for the defeat of the Nazis at Stalingrad. The day of November 19th was cold. A sharp wind was blowing, driving snow dust across the field, sweeping snowdrifts, white clouds were floating across the sky. We, with the Assistant Chief of Staff Captain N. Egorov, prepared the company of Lieutenant V. Fedorenko to capture the enemy. Fedorenko to capture the enemy bunker, which was an eyesore sticking out in front of the left flank of the regiment. Because of this strong firing point, fringed by a dense network of trenches, battles had already broken out. But so far it remained in the hands of the enemy. Soldiers of the company, divided into 3 groups assault, capture and reserve, moved to the front line. Artillery battery support opened fire. It hit the stronghold almost every morning for 10 to 15 minutes. The Nazis already knew this and, to avoid losses, hid in hiding. So they did this time, and as they say, fell into a trap. As soon as the first volleys sounded, all the soldiers of the company suddenly rushed forward, captured not only the first enemy trench, but also allowed the storming group to approach the pillbox. When Hitlerites regained consciousness, it was already too late. This defensive point was blown up. The fascists' counterattack also failed. I'll never forget the battle for height 137.8. It was a week before the New Year north of Orlovka. Here the fascists created a number of strongholds equipped with dugouts for 4 to 8 men. The dugouts were covered with sleepers, a half-metre layer of earth and armour plates taken from the tanks. The defence of the height was built in such a way that 4 lines of trenches diverged from its centre radially. This provided a mutual fire link between the strongholds and made it possible to cover all approaches to them with crossfire and flanking fire. In the first line of trenches there were machine guns. In the second and third lines there were added anti-tank guns and 81 mm mortars. In depth there were firing positions of artillery guns. It was defended by a combined battalion of the 92nd Motorized Infantry Regiment, which was supported by artillery of the 60th Motorized Division and tanks of the 16th Division. Hitlerites concentrated such a large force here because the height of 137.8 had an important tactical value. With the capture of the height, our troops had an opportunity to view and control the German defence and the road going from Orlovka to Gorodishchi, Kuzmichi, State Farm Experimental Field. And now our 1151st Regiment, together with 1153rd Regiment, received the task to seize the height of 137.8. The 1st Battalion was ordered to start the attack of fascist positions, which continued to be commanded by Nikolai Abukov, already well known to the reader, who became a captain in the battles at the Bend of the Don. Shouldered, medium height, with an unruly blonde bush peeking out from under the helmet, the 20-year-old commander with all his decisive appearance inspired confidence in the soldiers, who were ready to follow their commando in fire and water. He considered the golden rule of offensive combat words of the great Commander Suvorov: quickness and surprise replace the number. Having thoroughly studied the intelligence data, Abukov skillfully arranged the forces, clarified the interaction of artillerymen, machine gunners, persistently instilled in all the soldiers that speed and onslaught decide the success of the battle. On the night of December 25th, the bad weather raged, the frost intensified, it snowed heavily, a blizzard was rampant. Even after dark, the battalion stealthily approached the starting line. At dawn, breaking the thick veil of snowfall, flashed fiery shells Katyusha. Divisional cannons struck next. Machine guns rumbled on the enemy trenches. With the first salvos of Katyusha companies went on the attack to strike the enemy simultaneously from the flanks and from the front. By short runs, falling and bogging down in the snow, the soldiers pulled up almost to the very front line. And when the batteries moved the fire in depth, the soldiers, together with the snow whirlwind, burst into the first trench. The regimental commander sent me to the 1st Battalion, and I ran with Abukov, not a step behind the first chain.
On the left, then catching up with us, then running ahead, flashed with a red flag stuck behind his belt, Petty Officer I. A. Kuzmenko. In the trench we literally fell on the heads of the Hitlerites from the high bunker. Shots, blows, shouts, swearing, everything merged into one furious rumble of battle.
The 2nd Rifle Company, headed by Lieutenant V.S. Fedorenko, was the first to break into the enemy's location, who bravely and resolutely enthralled the soldiers by his personal example. Especially successful were the machine gunners under the command of Staff Sergeant Pechorin, who, advancing from the left flank, were the first to occupy the German dugouts and thus contributed to the successful advance of the next group of fighters. Ahead is still a line of dugouts. Each is well fortified, adapted to the defence. In the course of the message to the nearest of them is approaching the machine gun crew of Sergeant Sheglov. To the right of him pulls out on the berm his armoured fighter Communist Nikanin. These are reliable and experienced soldiers. For a year and a half of war they have seen a lot, experienced, hardened. Somewhere in the back comes the sonorous bass of Sergeant Ivan Bezdorozhny. He and his crew Kostrichenko, Potorov, Leonov, Matvienko and Ruzanov are pulling up a 45 mm anti-tank gun. Infantrymen rush to their aid. Together they drag the gun across the trench. I look around for contact. Abukov catches it and shouts, "Kovtun Galchenko," to me. The liaisons appear as if from under the ground. I send them to the artilleryman with a request to intensify fire on the German dugouts. In a few minutes, the bursts of our shells become more frequent and denser. Here is already behind and the second line of dugouts. Combat and his deputy on political part, political officer Viktor Vasilievich Kuzin, together with his subordinates, have already broken through to the southeastern slopes of height 137.8. Soldiers and commanders in one impulse. No fire can stop them. Somewhere on the side of the annoying enemy machine gun, Lieutenant N.R. Rudolph, deputy commander of the company PTR, without turning his head and without taking his eyes off the fiery flashes of machine gun fire, loudly orders, "Ruger, quickly." In a matter of seconds, he smashed an enemy machine gun with his PTR and helped the Abokov machine gunners to move forward. And when the fascists moved 3 tanks in counterattack, the lieutenant set one tank on fire with the fire from the anti-tank gun, another tank was hit, and the third one was driven away. Hitlerites at any cost sought to restrain the onslaught of the Soviet soldiers. When the enemy again intensified the shelling, the machine gun company of the 1st Battalion, under the command of Senior Lieutenant F.G. Garkusha, quickly suppressed and destroyed the enemy's firing points. Garkusha himself captured in battle a heavy machine gun and used this captured weapon to exterminate the retreating Germans. His deputy, Senior Lieutenant G.D. Kramtsev, in the hottest moment of the battle, also himself lay down behind the machine gun, meticulously suppressed the enemy's firing point, and captured trophies: 1 hand-held machine gun and 10 rifles. Meter by meter, our fighters gnawed through the enemy defense. Cannons are pulled up to direct fire. At this moment it became known about the feat of Company Petty Officer I.A. Kuzmenko. In the midst of battle was severely wounded company commander. The petty officer took command. Inspiring the soldiers, he with the unfurled red flag first climbed to the height, and so skillfully organized the defense that none of the enemy counterattacks did not succeed. By noon, the enemy pulled up reserves and 2 battalions of infantry supported by tanks pounced on our left flank. There was a hot fight. Our infantrymen cut off the enemy infantry from the tanks, stopped it in the deep snow. Artillerymen, commanded by experienced commanders Kostin and Radchenko, dealt with the tanks. They set fire to 10 vehicles. The rest were stopped by the fire of the anti-tank division from the depth of our defense and withdrew. When the height was fully occupied by us, the enemy began to counterattack the regiment with the support of tanks. December 26th, during one of these enemy counterattacks, was severely wounded the day before distinguished machine gun company commander Garkusha. His deputy, Senior Lieutenant Kramtsev, took command of the company, which heroically repulsed 5 enemy counterattacks, and Garkusha was taken out from under fire machine gunner Red Army soldier V.D. Dmitriev. Iron stamina, amazing fearlessness was shown during another counterattack of Hitlerites by the commander of the squad of the APC company, Senior Sergeant A.G. Garkovenko. He was not confused when several fascist tanks rushed to the position of the unit, and the armoured gunner had only 2 cartridges left. Having instantly assessed the situation, he decided to let the tanks get closer and hit them for sure, without a miss. Having waited until they came to a distance of 100 to 150 meters, Garkovenko opened fire. With the first shot he set one tank on fire, with the second he hit another. All attempts of the enemy to return the lost lines ended in failure. The armoured fighters also had a great merit in this. Lieutenant V.S. Kozlov, the commander of the company, skillfully arranged the forces, confidently controlled the fire, and he himself took out the enemy tank's cannon. San instructor Maria Kukarskaya, who had just returned to the regiment after treatment, distinguished herself again. She was in the thick of the fighting for the height of 137.8. On December 26th, when the Abukov battalion selflessly repulsed fierce counterattacks of the enemy, Kukarskaya, at the risk of her life, carried more than 20 wounded soldiers and commanders from the battlefield, having previously provided them with medical care. Under Stalingrad arrived in our regiment San instructor Maria Pokhaliuk. Black-eyed, cheerful Ukrainian girl kept up everywhere. And in this heavy battle she saved more than a dozen lives. Clear and timely evacuation of the wounded, skillfully organized, showing personal courage and fearlessness, the commander of the platoon of the regiment's sanitary company, Senior Paramedic A.D. Nekrasov. Senior Lieutenant M. Marcinovsky, inspired by the exploits of soldiers of the 1st Battalion, wrote a poem Abokovsy, which was printed in our divisional newspaper Heroic March. There are such lines there, dedicated to the final stage of the battle for the height of 137.8. After all, here are the Abokovsy, 1 or 20. It doesn't matter. The fascists will never break through. The capture of this height deprived the enemy of an important stronghold and gave the Soviet troops the opportunity to develop offensive operations on the road to Orlovka, Gorodishchi, Kuzmichi, the State Farm Experimental Field, the Drevny Val Crossing and the Tractor Factory. In these winter months, Russian frost gave us a real test of strength of spirit, and although the battles were hot, the soldiers and commanders were tormented by the cold. The mercury column of the thermometer rarely rose above -30 deg. In addition, in the open, treeless step-free to walk free piercing wind. The only salvation from the cold and wind was the dugouts, hastily equipped with homemade fireplaces, but what to heat them with? One could only dream of firewood and coal. Everything that could burn, including half-rotten straw dug out from under the snow, was burned. Then we started to stoke with talc. Yes, with talc, don't be surprised. We broke the talca balls into small pieces and put them in the firebox, and the explosives burned quietly with quite a hot flame. We tried to stoke with gunpowder from captured German shells. The shell itself was taken out of the shell casing, and the powder long tubes were shaken out on the floor of the dugout. These tubes were crumbled and put little by little into the firebox. There was a small explosion, but the walls of the stove withstood it. True, the gunpowder burned quickly and did not give as much heat as the crowd. Besides, it was dangerous to keep it in the dugout. It was enough to get on it even a flame from a match, and it exploded. Such an explosion happened in the dugout where the regiment commander Lt. Col. Pansky, the commander of the reconnaissance company, Captain Simenuta, and I lived. It was in the evening. Maria Pokalayuk, a sanitary instructor on duty in the trench, came in to warm up. In the stove, as usual, was slowly burning tolu, and about 3 meters away from it, on the floor, were several tubes of gunpowder. Simenuta, lighting a cigarette, inadvertently threw a match there. There was an explosion. All of them, however, were only slightly frightened. Nevertheless, the regiment commander forbade to use gunpowder from shells for heating. And we ate badly in those hard days. And not because there was no food in the warehouses. There was. But there was nothing to bring it on. Almost all the horses in the regiment had fallen from fodderlessness. And we had no cars. The main food was pearl porridge, which in the old Russian army soldiers aptly nicknamed shrapnel. Bread was delivered intermittently. The springs, from which we took water in the fall, froze. We got water by melting snow in cauldrons. But I can testify that even in such conditions the soldiers of the regiment beat the enemy fiercely, steadfastly repelled his desperate attacks. No one whined, did not complain about hardships. All honestly and selflessly fulfilled their duty to the motherland. In January, fierce fighting broke out over the Satu Gully. The offensive was conducted slowly, from trench to trench, from dugout to dugout. Every stronghold we captured was immediately secured. Guns were mounted on direct fire. Trenches for mortars, anti-tank guns and machine guns were equipped. This allowed us to successfully repel enemy counterattacks, to hold the conquered frontiers. In these exhausting battles we lost our comrades in arms. Brave officer showed himself in the battles for Satu Gully, commander of the 1st Rifle Company, Senior Lieutenant D. Pisarev. Under the strongest enemy fire, he skillfully, tactically competent led his unit, was the first to break into the enemy dugout and captured 5 German soldiers. During the battle he was wounded 3 times, but continued to command the company. When a machine gunner was killed by a mine burst, Pisarev himself lay down behind the hand machine gun. But soon an enemy Zero wounded the intrepid officer. The command was assumed by Senior Lieutenant I. N. Petremvushvili, who boldly and decisively led the fighters into the attack. On January 19, 1943, when the advancing units of the regiment had already seized the eastern spurs of Satu Bolka and the soldiers of the battalion were successfully moving forward, Captain Nikolai Dmitrievich Abukov died heroically when repelling one of Hitler's counterattacks. It happened in the area of Height 112-7, where the fascists had 7 lines of trenches to a depth of 3 kilometers. The battalion penetrated too far into the enemy defense and exposed its left flank. That's where the fascist tanks with infantry troopers rushed. Abukov took with him a group of soldiers and rushed to meet the landing. They managed to run to the cut-off trench. 3 tanks were walking on a ledge right at them. Behind the vehicles, chains of infantrymen. The captain looked around Red Army soldiers, skillfully shoveled snow, laid on the bumper grenades and bottles with a flammable mixture. He, too, shoveled a groove in the snow and prepared grenades. The minutes of waiting are languid. Hitler's tanks are getting closer. Suddenly at this tense moment, the commander heard the excited voice of Maria Kukarskaya. "How can we get along with them? There is no cannon." Abukov sharply threw. "Immediately get out of here." "Take the grenades." Maria opened her bag, carefully placed 2 anti-tank grenades at Abukov's feet, and, ducking down, silently moved away. The tanks struck the crest of the cut-off trench, which was a blackened, twisted bundle stretching to the rear of the regiment. The shells tore up the frozen ground, whipped up the snow just to the right and behind the chain of soldiers. They missed. And the tanks are getting closer and closer. They're no more than 50 meters away. And then grenades went into action. The front tank, unwinding the left caterpillar, spun on the spot. The second one had already piled its front rollers on the trench and began to turn around to trench it. At that moment, Captain Abukov threw an anti-tank grenade at the stern of the tank. A black cloud flew up over the machine. Nikolai fell to the bottom of the trench. Kukarskaya rushed to him. She opened the commander's jacket and squeezed her eyes shut. The uniform, pierced in several places, bloody soaked. The third tank did not risk approaching the trench. Shooting back, he faded to the beam. At that moment, the anti-tankers rolled out their guns to the cut-off position. In a short, bloody half-coat, Maria was rushing from one wounded man to another. An unwound bandage stretched from her bag with a white ribbon. Fatigue bent the girl's shoulders. Dozens of soldiers owed her their lives. With her own hands, she dug them out of the snow, bandaged them and dragged them on a frost-shortened cloak tent from the battlefield to the dugouts, to people, to warmth. Maria Kukarskaya's feat is unrivaled. Poems and songs were written about her at the front. The motherland highly appreciated her courage, awarding her the Order of Lenin for the battles near Stalingrad. Instead of the dead Nikolai Abukov, Senior Lieutenant M.F. Ananenko was appointed commander of the 1st Battalion. A communist with pre-war experience, Mikhail Fedorovich voluntarily went to the front from the post of chairman of the District Executive Committee. He was distinguished by enviable coolness and in the most dramatic situations of the battle never lost, acted bravely and decisively. In one of the first battles near Stalingrad, Ananenko was wounded in the leg, but he refused to go to the hospital, although he limped for almost 2 months. And to make it easier to move, he got a cavalry sabre, or rather, a blade without a sheath, and walked leaning on it like on a stick. That's how I remember him, a dashing infantryman in a cotton trench coat, with a naked sabre in his hand. Almost the whole January we were pursuing the retreating enemy. In difficult battles the regiment liberated Kuzmichi, the State Farm experimental field. The breakthrough of Hitlerites' fortifications was skillfully realized by the 1st Rifle Company, which was now commanded by Lieutenant P. I. Melnikov. Under his leadership, the company knocked out the Germans from 6 dugouts, taking 16 prisoners, in hand-to-hand combat killed 50 fascists, and captured 1 heavy and 2 hand machine guns. And the 2nd Rifle Platoon, under the command of Junior Lieutenant A. M. Martinov, knocked out the Nazis from 4 dugouts. In these battles distinguished themselves and the soldiers of the mortar platoon, Lieutenant A. F. Ilchenko, and mortar calculation, Nizakutny, Lieutenant T. M. Arbazov, deputy commander of the mortar company, constantly corrected the fire mortars. From the January reports of Sovinform Bureau we knew that there were battles to break the blockade of Leningrad, and on January 18th it was broken through. It was a great holiday for all Soviet people. And on January 21st we learned about the expulsion of Nazi invaders from Stavropol, the city where our regiment was formed, Rallies were held in the units. The soldiers decided to send an open letter to the newspaper Stavropolskaya Pravda to their fellow countrymen, in which they congratulated them on the liberation of the region and expressed the hope that Stavropol residents will revive the cities, villages and make a worthy contribution to the economy of the country. And we, the soldiers of the regiment, assured their fellow countrymen, will crush the hated enemy and will spare neither blood nor life to achieve complete victory over Hitler's Germany. The letter was signed by Petty Officer Doroshenko, Sergeant Teriev and Red Army man Galchenko from Petrovsky District, Junior Sergeant Kutsevalov from Blogodarnensky District, Captain Borozhenets and Red Army man Shiriev from Krasnovodisky District, Red Army man Prokoda from Novo-Alexandrovsky District, Lieutenants Kovtun and Chernenko from Apanasenkovsky District, Senior Lieutenant Pirogov and Red Army man Moshayev from Nogotsky District, and other Stavropol residents. The day of January 26th was memorable for the soldiers of the regiment. On this day at Mamayev, Kurgan troops of the 21st and 62nd Armies of the Don Front united, thus dismembering the encircled grouping of German troops into two parts, northern and southern. We were finishing the northern part. On January 23rd, 343rd Infantry Division made the main blow in the direction of Orlovka, Stalingrad tractor plant. A few days later we came close to the ruins of the factory buildings. Here they are, mangled by bombs and shells, burnt by fire, black, sorrowfully broken skeletons silently rising above the ground. It is painful to look not only at the people wounded, maimed by war, it is painful to look at the buildings turned into ruins, at the land disfigured by craters, ospreys and trenches. All this is unnatural, directed against life itself, human being. The regiment took up positions along the crest of a gully, with the strange name of Mokryaya Machetka. The CP was set up in a hut in the gully, and the NP was placed on the ridge. That day the three of us sat at the command post Lieutenant Colonel Pansky, Major Shkurin and me. We discussed how to storm a large 3-story building, apparently the former administrative building of the tractor plant. It was necessary to create assault groups, to determine the firepower to support the attack. "You take care of it, Yuri Andreevich," said to me the regiment commander, "and the commissar and I will go to the NP. From there you can see what and how to do, and at the same time to watch the Germans." Not an hour later, as the telephone buzzer sounded, I picked up the receiver, pressed the valve with my hand. "Trouble, comrade captain." I recognized the excited voice of the Chief of Intelligence, Captain Belousov. The regiment commander was wounded, and the deputy commander was killed. 400 meters, separating the NP from the command post, I overcame in a few minutes. The good thing in the snow was already beaten path. I saw a sad picture. The dugout of the observation post had been torn apart by a shell explosion. On the earthen floor lay Pansky and Shkurin. The regiment commander was conscious, he was wounded in the leg, and the body of the deputy commander was terrible to look at. Both legs to the knees were torn off, his face was covered with blood. And there was a pistol lying nearby. Later we found out Shkurin was alive after the wounding, but put a bullet in his temple. Either he couldn't stand the agony, or he didn't want to be a cripple. My faithful front comrade, who was loved in the regiment for justice, courage, attention to people, died, and again I became the regiment commander. But not for long. And Shkurin was replaced by Battalion Commissar I.G. Bezukov. The morning of February 2nd was frosty, winter gloomy. Through the small frosted windows of the hut, nestled on the slope of the Mokraya Machetka gully, where the headquarters of our regiment, reluctantly oozed dawn. In the hut we had to light a smokestack. A thin, flickering light flickered over a roughly chipped table, around which on rickety, creaking benches sat my comrades, the Assistant Chief of Staff of the regiment, Captains L. K. Samorukov, A.P. Ishkov and the Chief of Intelligence, Captain A. Belosov. In the dim light of a smokestack the faces of my comrades seem older, sterner. As always calmly, looks Blue Eyes Alexei Samorukov. He has an amazing ability to keep composure, self-control in any conditions, even when the land around is crumbling from the bursts of bombs and shells. Next to Alexei impatiently fidgets on the bench Anatoly Belousov. It is felt that he does not sit in one place. Anatoly's active and lively nature requires movement and action. In the black hair of the captain glistens grey the memory of raids behind enemy lines. Older than all of us Alexander Ishkov, who among the rude front people is famous for his politeness, correctness. With him even the most inveterate witters do not dare to use a coolly salted expression. Belousov, having bent back the sleeve of his cotton coat, looks at his watch 8. In 2 hours our regiment is ordered to attack the Nazis, who are in the ruins of the tractor plant. Damned Hans. Anatoly jumps up from the bench and finds himself at the window, covered with a fluffy coating of frost. What the hell are they doing here, like sheep? We fully share the comrades' indignation. The whole of Stalingrad knows about Paulus' surrender. The group of fascists, surrounded in the southern parts of the city, laid down their arms. And only here, in the north, settled in the ruins of the tractor plant, Hitlerites continue to desperately resist. What are they hoping for? The ring of our troops has firmly encircled the remnants of the 6th German Army. They have nowhere to go. The most sensible thing for them to do now is to surrender. Every extra hour of resistance only increases the number of casualties from our bombs and shells, from severe frost, from hunger. Much later I happened to read in one book that Hitler's officers received in Stalingrad 150 grams of bread a day, soldiers 50 grams. Often this miserable norm was cut in half. We fed on horse meat of frozen horses. Even in early January, thousands of leaflets with the appeal to the soldiers and officers of the German army, surrounded in the Stalingrad area, were scattered over the Hitlerites' positions from airplanes. It was signed by the commanders of the Stalingrad and Don fronts, Colonel General A. I. Eremenko and Lieutenant General K.K. Rokossovsky. A German soldier who surrenders in a hopeless overlap, the address said, commits not an act of shame, but an act of prudence. The Soviet command sincerely sought to prevent mass, senseless sacrifice. And it was not our fault that battles rumbled and blood was shed. With the persistence of fanatics, Hitler's command demanded from its shabby soldiers one thing to fight. Not relying on the force of the order, the fascists tightened repression. The lines of a document found among the papers of the defeated headquarters of one of Hitler's corps are filled with fierce, beastly malice. Everyone who tries to capitulate will be shot. Anyone who throws a white flag over a trench will be shot. Everyone who picks up bread and sausage dropped from the airplane and does not surrender them will be shot. At the same time, an equally cannibalistic order was given to the encircled group: the wounded and sick shall not be given any more grams of food. And at the same time, by Goebbels' personal order, all radio programs for soldiers and officers of Paulus' army dying in the Stalingrad cauldron had to end with the song after December, "May Always Comes Again." It is hard to think of a more monstrous, more cynical mockery of the people doomed to a painful death among strangers, ruins burning with fire and hatred. Nothing helped neither furious attempts to rescue the troops of the 6th Army from the encirclement, nor threats of execution, nor sentimental songs. Individual soldiers, battalions, and even regiments spontaneously surrendered. The very ones that, to the thunder of victory orchestras, entered Brussels and marched on Paris. The same ones that put the cities of Yugoslavia and Greece on fire, spilled the blood of peaceful Polish peasants, brought sorrow to the Soviet land. Fortitude and courage of Soviet soldiers sobered up many heads, clouded by delusions of world domination. The pointlessness of further resistance in the end recognized in Paulus himself, January 30th, 1943, produced by Hitler in General Field Marshals. A day later he signed an order to surrender the southern grouping of Hitler's troops. And the northern still continued to resist. Much we did not know in those days, much became known only years and years later. One thing we understood then well: the gigantic battle on the Volga was coming to an end. And each of us was burning with the desire to do everything to bring the days of victory closer, to clear the wounded city from fascist filth as soon as possible. We once again checked the readiness for the attack. It would seem that everything was provided for, everything was calculated. But in war as in war, any surprises are possible. The Nazis had turned the tractor factory into a stronghold. The ruins were literally packed with firing points. Every metre of the ground, strewn with broken bricks and burnt iron, was shot by enemy machine guns. And our forces were, as they say, a pussycat. There were only a few dozen active bayonets left in the regiment. There would not be enough for a full-blooded company. Fighting in Stalingrad cost us a high price. Fighting in the city is much different from those conducted in the field. High buildings and other structures, closely adjacent to each other, noticeably narrow the view, constrain maneuver, complicate the actions of attached units. Destroyed houses, rubble in the streets, mine explosive barriers, fires split the originally adopted combat order of attacking units into separate groups, which often have to act independently. Fighting in Stalingrad led to the birth of new methods of fighting the enemy. In the conditions of a large city, the most effective were the actions of assault groups and assault detachments. Their composition and structure depended on the nature of the attacked object, its size, the strength of the defense, and the combat effectiveness of the garrison. All this influenced the choice of means of support for the attacking units. This time we were carefully calculating our capabilities, trying to maximize the use of everything that was available. It's not much, Samorukov shifted his eyebrows with concern. We should take more grenades, said Belousov. With a grenade you can pull a German out of any crevice. Ishkov went out and in a few minutes returned, carrying a pot of hot tea in one hand and a loaf of frozen bread in the other. Tea is good. Belousov revived and looked at me slyly. Have you got anything stronger? It will be stronger when you report that your scouts have given the Krots a proper smoke, I answered. Under the friendly jokes quickly emptied mugs with tea. Belousov rose from the table first. I went to the NP, he said briefly in a different, serious voice. We looked after him in silence. For a minute an anxious silence hung in the hut. Will I see you after the battle, I thought. I read the same thoughts on the faces of my comrades. The war taught us to face the truth, no matter how cruel it was. You can talk to a friend, and after a while see him lying on the ground with a bloody temple, on which rare cold snowflakes are no longer melting, and no one knows when and to whom it will happen. Captain Anatoly Arsentyevich Belousov passed alive and unharmed through the heat of battle near Stalingrad. A Nazi bullet found him on the Dnieper in the dank fall of 1943. Almost simultaneously rose from the table Samorukov and Ishkov. In their eyes, too, there was no trace of recent jokes. At the front I had witnessed more than once how even the most hardened, fearless people before the battle subtly changed, as if they cut off everything unnecessary from themselves, concentrating their thoughts on one thing, waiting for the first, most languid minutes of the attack. Suddenly the telephone beeped. I hastily picked up the receiver and heard the familiar voice of the commander of the 1st Battalion, Senior Lieutenant M.F. Ananenko. Comrade Captain. The commander's voice was filled with some kind of joy that was still incomprehensible to me. We have a parliamentarian here. What parliamentarian? I was surprised. German. A lieutenant, I think, with a white flag. What news? Just now all my thoughts were occupied with the upcoming battle, and now this parliamentarian. What does he want? Take the German to regimental headquarters immediately, I ordered. Obviously on my face was written such excitement that Samorukov and Ishkov at once exclaimed. What happened? There. I don't understand it myself yet, I honestly admitted. Wait. Now they will bring a German parliamentarian. Let's hear what he has to say. The door of the hut opened, and through the threshold stepped a medium-sized, thin German officer in a rather shabby overcoat. In spite of his poor appearance, he tried to keep up his appearance, and saluted with a dapper gesture, clicking the heels of his boots. Following the German entered political officer V.V. Kuzin, Deputy Battalion Commander for Political Affairs. Parliamentarian delivered, Comrade Captain, he reported. I involuntarily held my gaze on the German officer. It was somehow strange to see an unarmed enemy a few steps away from me. During my stay at the front, I got used to the fact that anyone wearing a fascist uniform was trying to kill me. In the same way, I got used to killing everyone who took on the enemy's guise. The only question is who can do it the fastest. and suddenly a peaceful meeting in a simple Russian hut, outside the windows of which a clear winter morning is burning. From a small stove smells cozy warmth. It seems as if a kind neighbour came in for a moment, prepared to tell some news, waiting to hear something in response. "Ah, war, what have you done, you sneaky one," sings one post-war song. It is sung about the fact that the boys put on soldiers' sizzles, parted with their youth for a while, learned a completely different life, so different from the old one. The war abruptly changed people's destinies, meetings and ideas about the world. And not in a hospitable village hut we are standing, but in the headquarters of our regiment, and not a friendly conversation we have to carry, but a tough conversation about someone's life and someone's death. The face of the German officer outwardly looks impassive, but the anxious squint of his eyes betrays the tense anxiety of the lieutenant. He's about the same age as me. Maybe at the same time we went to school, scribbling over textbooks, diligently scribbling down notebooks. He is standing in front of me in a dirty, leaky sizzle and looking at me and my comrades with fearful expectation. I am listening. I abruptly cut off the long silence. "I have the honour to inform you," the German lieutenant hastily spoke in a fairly passable Russian language, "that I am a parliamentarian from the commander of the 24th Panzer Division, General von Lenski. He instructed me to tell the Russian command that the division agrees to cease resistance if—" What other if? I couldn't stand it. Surrender. And that's it. "I am following orders," said the parliamentarian in an exculpatory tone. "General von Lenski said that the division will cease resistance if all soldiers and officers will be preserved life, help the wounded and sick. In addition, we ask to keep our awards, as well as cold weapons." The lieutenant further reported that he had been accompanied to our front line by a colonel, the commander of a German artillery regiment. He remained in the German trench to meet and escort to General von Lenski, the representative of the Soviet command, who would be charged with accepting the surrender of the German Panzer Division. Without a moment's hesitation, I called Colonel M. Vodopyanov, who commanded our division at that time. Parliamentarian immediately bring to the headquarters of the division, having listened to my detailed report, ordered the commander. "And what about von Lenski?" I reminded him. After all, he is waiting for an answer. "What, can't wait to take the German general prisoner?" "That's right. We must finish with the Germans quickly, Comrade Colonel." "Act according to the situation," the division commander said briefly. I took it as permission to accept the surrender from the Germans. I can't hide, I wanted to take Hitler's general prisoner, and even with the prefix von. He must be an important bird. When we're young, we're all a little vain. The consciousness that I, a Soviet captain, would dictate the terms of surrender to the fascist general filled my heart with proud excitement. At that moment I did not think about the fact that I would have to go not to the palace for diplomatic negotiations, but to the very lair of the fascist beast, where I would not be welcomed with cordial smiles. But there was another reason, deeper and more important than the desire to capture the fascist general myself, which made me forget about the danger. I have already said that we all had the thought to get rid of the Nazis as quickly as possible. How could I miss the opportunity, even for an hour, even for a few minutes, to bring the end of the fighting closer? Maybe these very moments will save the life of some of my comrades. Samorukov. "You stay for the regiment, Commander," I ordered my deputy, when the German parliamentarian, accompanied by the same political officer Kuzin, was sent to the division headquarters. "I'm going to the Germans." "Maybe it would be better for me?" suggested Samorukov. "You'll have time, but for now don't go before the father in the heat of the moment." "It's not easy to go alone," Ishkov said with displeasure. "It's a serious matter." True. I recognized the rightness of my comrade. Who should we take with us? "Take a machine gunner and one officer," said Samorukov businesslike. "Best of all, Klayev." I also thought of him, the agitator of the regiment, senior political officer Vasily Vasilievich Klayev. Everyone knew him as an exceptionally restrained, cold-blooded officer who did not lose his presence of mind in any, the most difficult circumstances. He was best suited to participate in negotiations with the Germans. A few minutes later, Klayev arrived at headquarters. Having silently listened to my order, he smiled miserably. I have never before seen how to accept the surrender. Get used to it. I laughed. Look, someday you will be invited, as experienced in Berlin, to accept the surrender of Hitler himself. We wanted to believe that the victory at Stalingrad would be the beginning of our decisive offensive, that the end of the war was just around the corner. The first hope, in general, was justified. There was a break in the consciousness of the entire world community, which recognized that our socialist fatherland could not be defeated, that the crushing defeat of the Nazis at the walls of the legendary hero city saved the whole world from fascist slavery. Statinius, aide to us President Roosevelt, wrote the American people should always remember that in 1942 they stood on the edge of the abyss. If the Soviet Union had not held the front along the entire line, the Germans would have occupied England, followed by the occupation of all of Africa. Then they would have opened the way to Latin America. Courage and unparalleled steadfastness of Soviet soldiers who broke the back of the fascist beast in the snowy Volga steppes ensured peace and freedom for millions of people on the banks of the Thames and the Amazon, the Nile and the Mississippi. As for the hope for a speedy end to the war, it was not so simple. Ahead of us awaited new brutal battles, new kilometers of front roads, hundreds of days and nights separating us from the great victory. In a low, semi-dark dugout we were met by the battalion commander, Senior Lieutenant M.F. Ananenko. Together with him was the deputy commander of the company, on the political part of the political officer Im Smirnov. Ananenko reported on the situation in the area of the battalion. According to the plan, it was to strike the last blow to the Nazis. The unexpected appearance of the German parliamentarian made changes in it, and quite happy. "Well, how is our Kraut?" Smiling, asked me political officer Smirnov, emphasizing the word our. In the battalion felt proud that it is in their section occur such important events. "It's all right. They sent him to the division headquarters. Let them deal with him there, feed him. Feed him," I concluded with a smile. "I think he won't need it now," Nikolai said enigmatically. "Why?" And Smirnov, chuckling, said that the parliamentarian, entering the dugout, so hungry eyes looked at our soldiers, prepared for breakfast, that one of them could not stand it, and shoved the German a piece of bread and a pot of porridge. The German officer's face trembled. He carefully took the bread and the kettle in his frostbitten hands and muttered in a squeezed voice, "Russians are an amazing people." "Yes, amazing. An enemy who lays down his arms ceases to be an object of vengeance for us. He is treated humanely. Never, even during the most severe and harsh trials, Soviet soldiers have never ceased to be humanists, people of a big, kind heart." We came out of the dugout. The machine gunner who accompanied us raised a stick with a white flag higher, and we climbed up on the berm of the trench. There was still an unusual silence over our and German trenches. Only somewhere in the distance, to the north of us, there were occasional shots. We stood at full height, and at that moment I seemed to myself strangely grown, unprotected. It seemed that if I took a single step forward, the silence would immediately explode with the crackle of machine gun and antimate bursts and grenade bursts. "Well, let's move, overcoming a momentary weakness," I told my comrades. We had already moved away from our positions by 70 to 80 meters, when a tall, wary-faced German colonel came out of the trench to meet us. He looked at us incredulously, looking for insignia. But we were dressed the same way in Telogoriki cotton pants and felt boots. Clothes very convenient for combat operations in winter, but completely unsuitable for parade rank presentation. "Regimental Commander Captain Normenko," I came forward. "Your parliamentarian has arrived to us. I am authorized to accept the surrender of your division." From behind the shoulder of the colonel came forward some man in a half-military uniform and quickly spoke in German. I realized that the colonel had brought an interpreter with him. They exchanged a few phrases, and the interpreter, carefully enunciating the words, said in a subservient voice, "Mr. Polkovnik earnestly requests a visit to the headquarters of his regiment." "What for?" I was wary. We need General von Lenski. Take him to him. The interpreter frightenedly repeated my demand in German. The colonel's face showed confusion. He turned to the interpreter again. He listened attentively to the long tirade and turned to us. According to our established procedure, Herr Colonel must report to Herr General von Lenski by telephone and obtain permission to meet him. What a bureaucracy they have set up here. I muttered in my heart, but Klayev soothingly put his hand on my shoulder. To hell with them. What can we do, if that's how they do it? Let's go to the headquarters, to the colonel. The Germans led us along a path winding between piles of broken bricks, remains of burned cars and snowdrifts covered with a thick layer of soot. Corpses were visible. One of them caught my eye. A German soldier was lying flat on the frozen ground. He spread his arms wide, as if he wanted to take our land with him. For a moment I had a vengeful feeling in my soul. No one called this fascist to our land. You wanted our land? Get it frozen, smoky, did not want to become even a grave for the hated invader. We came to the ruins of some building. The colonel silently walked forward, pushed open the board door that covered the entrance to the basement. We went down the steps covered with ice. It was dusky and cold under the low vaults of the basement, where light could hardly penetrate through the narrow windows. The German colonel had disappeared somewhere. The interpreter tramped after him and disappeared. I looked around. Dozens of wounded soldiers were lying and sitting on the dirty cement floor. From all sides I could hear moans, incoherent shouts, curses. There was nothing to breathe in the stale air from the smell of filth, rotting wounds and burnt rags. We've had it, spat the machine gunner who was accompanying us. Hearing the sounds of Russian speech, several wounded men, who were closer to us, became wary and turned their heads in our direction. There were threatening cries. I felt uneasy. What would it take for one of the fascists, who had lost their human form in this stinking dungeon, to shoot at us out of spite? Then we'd have to prove that we came here in good faith. And then the colonel just disappeared into thin air. Isn't this all a trap? What do we do now? I was beginning to think how we could get out of the cellar safely, if events should take an undesirable turn, when the colonel appeared out of the darkness, accompanied by an interpreter. He waved at us from afar. It's all right. Mister. General von Lenski is waiting for you at his headquarters. And it was funny and annoying to watch all these ceremonies that the Germans had organized around the obvious need to stop resistance. Who needs this pathetic game of significance when hundreds and thousands of soldiers are dying of wounds, hunger, fierce cold? Frankly speaking, I was tempted to say to the Germans, cut the crap. Time is running out, and only the fear that this might harm the cause for which we had come here kept me from strong expressions about the praised German pedantry. We were relieved to get out of the cellar. After the stuffy gloom of the underground shelter, the winter sunny day seemed to me even brighter, and the frosty air unusually fresh and clean. The German colonel went ahead again. In about 10 to 15 minutes we found ourselves near the ruins of a house, near which a sentry was standing. He silently let us inside. Between the ruined walls we could see the entrance to the cellar. We went down into it, and I saw a spacious, fairly clean room. German officers were walking about, talking to each other. When they saw us, all of them, as if on command, stopped and stood waiting. From the opposite end of the cellar, a short, stubby general appeared silently and walked straight toward us. Two other generals followed him sluggishly. Mr. General von Lenski, the interpreter respectfully introduced him, but I already understood that before us was the commander of the very German division, which is ready to lay down arms. Who are you? Asked me through the interpreter von Lepsky. Regimental commander, I answered dryly. Your rank? Captain. On behalf of the Soviet command, I suggest that you cease resistance immediately. Only then will the conditions your parliamentarian informed us about be fulfilled. Von Lepsky twitched, but quickly regained his composure. Only his shoulders slumped. Circumstances have changed in the last hour, he began in a cracking voice. Not only my division, but also the entire group of our troops, concentrated in this area, agreed to stop the resistance. Our commander, Colonel General von Strecker, would like to know the answer of your command. I turned to Klyev, puzzled. Such a turn of events was not foreseen by us. We need to quickly inform ours, whispered Vesely Veshe. No matter how much I wanted to finish with all the formalities, but Klyev was right, it is necessary to notify our command of the new circumstances of the German surrender. I must inform the army commander, I said loudly. Okay, von Lenski nodded curtly. About 20 minutes later, we were back in Ananenko's battalion. To my surprise, the deputy commander of the army, Major General M.I. Kozlov, was already waiting for us there. How are the backgrounds? Impatiently asked him. The commander is very interested in matters with the surrender of the Germans. I reported in detail about everything we encountered in the German headquarters, stuffing up the price of the fascists. General Kozlov grinned and added animatedly forward, Stalingraders. Ours has taken it after all. Colonel-General von Strecker, tall, thin, with a jumping from excitement cadacle on his wrinkled neck, standing at attention, tensely listened to Major General Kozlov, who listed the terms of surrender and invited von Strecker to follow to the army commander, General Zhadov. Permit me to take an adjutant with me, hesitantly asked Strecker, and raised on Major General Kozlov watery eyes. He waved his hand, say, to hell with you, take it. When we left the headquarters of the commander of the northern grouping of Hitler's troops, columns of German prisoners were already being built in the street. Soldiers and officers of the now defunct 6th Army were stretching eastward in a long line. The miserable look was at these grief-stricken conquerors. Many of them wandered along the road to Dubovka with frostbitten noses, ears wrapped in rags, in ersatz mittens made of straw. Only our 343rd Infantry Division took 6,796 Hitlerites prisoner, among them 4 generals, 12 colonels, 112 other officers, 510 non-commissioned officers. In the area of the tractor plant, the division captured from the enemy 67 guns of different calibers, 13 mortars, 8 6-barrel mortars, 207 machine guns, 30 tanks, 6 armoured vehicles, 2 warehouses with fuel and ammunition, and a lot of other weapons and property. Above Stalingrad was a clear, calm sky. It was like that for the first time after 200 long days and nights of the Great Battle. And it had to happen that on this very day, February 2nd, the day when the fighting was over, I received my third, fortunately the last, wound in the war. And it happened like this. After I escorted General Kozlov together with the captured German General von Strecker from the regiment, I wanted to look at the Mother Volga, even if it was covered with snow. After all, I had been fighting near it for 3 months, but I had never seen it. I took a machine gunner with me and went through the ruins of the tractor plant, and only we came to the crossroads, from where the Volga was clearly visible, only I looked at it, a shot rang out. Immediately my right leg was burned and I fell down. A machine gunner ran up. "What's the matter, comrade captain?" "I think I was wounded," I said, but I thought to myself, what an accident. I survived the battle unharmed, and here you are. Truly, a bullet is a fool. A Red Army man bandaged my leg, helped me to get to the knife headquarters, and from there to the infirmary. There they examined the wound. It turned out that the thigh bones were not damaged, but nevertheless they wanted to send me to the hospital. I asked to be connected by phone with the division commander, reported the situation to him, and he allowed me to stay in the infirmary. The weather in February 1943 was unusually severe. It seems that Ukrainians gave this month the name fierce not in vain. Penetrating, cold winds blew across the expanses of Stalingrad land. The snowstorm was bringing high drifts. The snow gradually covered under its cover the mangled enemy tanks, guns and other military equipment scattered haphazardly on the steppe, covered the craters from aircraft bombs and artillery shells. Unusual was also the silence that reigned around, which replaced the rumble of cannonade, the crackle of gunfire, rumbling almost continuously on the banks of the Great Russian River for half a year. Each of us, frontline soldiers, felt along with a sense of pride and moral satisfaction a feeling of some physical relief, as if after an incredible strain managed to throw off the shoulders of an impossible weight that threatened to crush you with its enormous weight. My heart was jubilant, but at the same time it was pierced by a sharp pain at the sight of the smoking ruins of the Volga city, which was dear to all of us, Soviet people. The whiteness of the snow contrasted sharply with the black holes of windows and doorways in the destroyed houses and buildings of the tractor plant. The battles near Stalingrad were a serious test for me, not only because they were characterized by their fierceness, persistence, unusually difficult conditions, but mainly because for a long time I had to perform the duties of the regiment commander. Pansky was twice wounded in the battles and commanded for only 2 weeks. In the medical center, I met the 25th anniversary of the Red Army. This festive day became especially memorable and joyful. The order was announced on awarding me the Order of the Red Banner and awarding me the military rank of Major. In the Army and Navy at this time were introduced epaulettes. So I returned to the regiment, already having them on my shoulders. I returned to my post Chief of Staff. I must say that in the battles of Stalingrad, soldiers of our regiment, as well as all other units involved in this grandiose battle on the Volga, showed mass heroism. For bravery and courage, 152 soldiers, commanders and political workers were awarded orders and medals. On February 24th, I was visited by Senior Lieutenant V.I. Dodnikov in the medical unit. He told me how the holiday was held in the regiment and division. On the slopes of Grachvaya Gully, right on the snow, out of frost-covered stones and lumps of frozen clay, were laid out in big letters slogans: "Long live the 25th anniversary of the Red Army, glory to the heroic defenders of Stalingrad." At the headquarters of the division, cleared of snow, a large area, in the center of which put in the vicinity of 2 trucks with folded swords. By noon, soldiers of all units and subdivisions of the division lined up in front of the podium with unfurled battle banners. At exactly 12 o'clock, the command attention was heard. Major General M.A. Yusenko, commander of the division, went around the formation, greeted the soldiers, congratulated them on the holiday and the victory in the Battle of Stalingrad. Then he went up to the improvised podium, where there were already Deputy Commander of the division, on the political part of the regimental Commissar V.N. Smirnov, head of the political department of the division battalion Commissar Alaska Tichenko, Chief of Staff of the division, Colonel M. Vodopyanov. Everyone knew that Major General M.A. Yusenko during the Civil War was awarded 2 Orders of the Red Banner for bravery and courage shown in battle. We also knew that he considered it his duty to be among the soldiers, trying to see everything with his own eyes, had a kind, truly paternal character, remaining a demanding, strong-willed commander. In his short speech, he noted the main milestones of the quarter-century heroic path of the Red Army, called on all soldiers, commanders and political workers to carry with honor the battle banners, covered with glory in the coming battles. He emphasized that the victory at Stalingrad was of great political and military importance. A loud hurrah echoed repeatedly in the frosty air. Then the units and subdivisions marched past the tribune in a solemn march. Dudnikov brought me in fresh issues of the divisional newspaper Heroic March. In one of them was published a poem by Lieutenant J. Satanovsky, Stalingrad March. Of course, now I realize that it is far from being a poetic masterpiece. But in those days, when the battles on the Stalingrad land were still fresh in my memory, the poem seemed to me even good. I will cite here a few quatrains of this march. Let us remember, fellow Stalingraders, of recent affairs, how the military road led us to victory. Let's remember the Rodnikova Gully, the first battle for the height. Let's remember how in a blizzard we reached the Satu Gully. The road was not easy. The way to Stalingrad was hard. Words to those who met their doom. Like a Bulkov, the combat. Through the experimental field, Kuzmichi and Drevnie Val, to the very walls of Stalingrad. We were led by our general. For almost a month our regiment was at Ilovlia station. Like other parts of the division, was engaged in combat training. During the classes, special attention was paid to the accelerated mastering of combat skills with the use of firearms, hand-to-hand combat techniques, general physical training of new recruits. The regiment was staffed with personnel. The division created training units, where officers and sergeants with extensive combat experience were appointed as commanders. In his memoirs 4 Years of War Hero of the Soviet Union, Army General A.S. Zhadov rightly noted that these measures later fully justified themselves. We were able to significantly replenish the losses at the expense of our own training units. Now, we built combat training taking into account the requirements of the combat regulations of the Red Army Infantry, which came to the troops at the end of 1942. It took into account the experience of fighting in 1941 to 1942 and gave clear recommendations on the organization of both offensive and defensive combat. The statute also defined specific duties of commanders and staffs to manage units in combat, to organize interaction. Our 343rd Infantry Division in early April arrived at the place of its new deployment at the station Kanovaya. In the middle of April 1943, by the order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, the 66th Army was transformed into the 5th Guards Army, and on May 4th, also by the order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, the 343rd was transformed into the 97th Guards Rifle Division. And our 1151st Rifle Regiment became from that day on to be called the 289th Guards Rifle Regiment. By that time the regiment commander P.R. Pansky, who had already become a lieutenant colonel, had returned from the hospital. All of us together, the regiment commander, his deputy and the political part 1. G. Bazukov and I thoroughly discussed the plan to hold meetings and talks in all units dedicated to the transformation of our division and regiment in the Guards. But first there was a division-wide rally. Our mood on May 5th was solemn and uplifted, which was in no small measure facilitated by the warm spring weather. The first to speak at the rally was the division commander, Major General Ma Yuzenko. He announced the order to transform the unit into the 97th Guards Division, congratulated all present on this event, and expressed confidence that its soldiers will honorably carry the name of Guardsmen to increase their feats of arms and achieve together with the entire Red Army the final defeat of the hated enemy. By this time all the units of the regiment were fully staffed with personnel, weapons and ammunition. Although fierce battles were to be fought, and the Guards were persistently preparing for them. Companies learned to storm the long-term, deeply echeloned enemy defences, studied methods of fighting new types of German tanks and self-propelled guns. Regimental and battalion staff studied methods of unit management in all types of combat. Party political work in the units intensified. Party and Komsomol workers paid a lot of attention to the new additions. They told the young soldiers about the combat path of the regiment and its traditions. Company and battery party organizations were strengthened in all companies and batteries.